Morning, everyone. Hi, hello, Hilary again. So we have been chatting for 5 minutes. Always feels a little bit artificial, but still. So before we get started, I'll go through the housekeeping. I just wanted to say hello and good morning to everybody. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces and a few newbies in the sign-ups there. If you've not joined before, welcome along to our monthly breakfast session where we invite the great and the good, leading figures from design and innovation to come and chat to us about their practice. And I am delighted to be joined by Hilary Knight today, who we will allow to introduce herself properly in just a couple of minutes. Just to run through the basics, we're going to be chatting for about 45-60 minutes. How long really depends on how chatty Hilary's feeling today and you guys. So whether you submit the questions and keep us occupied. So please do ask questions. Use the Q&A. Pop your questions in there, and my colleagues will be surfacing those, and we'll answer them. We'll take a couple of breaks through the chat to answer those. Keep the chat window free for salacious gossip. We are recording. Can't see you, so hopefully nobody has any objections with that. But we'll be sharing the recording shortly after we've finished. So if you have to drop off, don't worry too much. You can always pick up where you left off, and would be really grateful if you share the video with any of your colleagues that you think it might be of interest to. Last piece, there's no fire alarm scheduled. So if there is a fire alarm, I hope you know where your exits are. I can't really help you with that. So, okay, great. So as we tip over into a year in lockdown and sort of tentatively, start to make baby steps towards emerging from lockdown, obviously, the national preoccupation seems to be when the pubs and the restaurants are going to open. But equally, there are many, many millions of people who are starved for the museums and galleries and their cultural fixes. Certainly, I am very much looking forward to an afternoon of wandering around Edinburgh's museums and galleries and enjoying a quiche and a salad, because it's always a quiche and a salad in one of the cafes. Hilary, our guest today, has obviously, as Director of Digital, been through some disruption, it's fair to say, and over the last 12 months. But given that you've been at the Tate since 2015, you've obviously overseen a wider program of digital innovation and engagement. So thank you again so much for joining us today. We first crossed paths, myself and Dave and Jessica, with you, Hilary, back when we were working on Film 4, which is longer ago than I care to remember. So what have you been up to since? Have you been keeping busy?
Oh my God. I can barely, I struggle to remember last week, let alone back then. What have I been up to since then? So Film 4, I went and did a bit of a stint at the Book Trust very briefly. I can't even remember, I had a child, and now I'm at the Tate. And I joined Tate as head of content in 2015, and then I was promoted to director of digital a couple of years ago.
Yeah, great, fantastic. So can you broadly just introduce what your role is? So what does that mean as director of digital? Because there's a lovely description covering some of the things on your LinkedIn profile, but director of digital, what does that actually entail at the Tate?
So I'm responsible for the audience-facing digital strategy for the organization, and any digital means we use to reach our audiences through our website and through digital interactives in the gallery. So it's very much sort of that audience customer facing. And within my remit is obviously mostly the website and all the content that we make for that. And we have in Tate Modern, when it's open, we have a drawing bar and a timeline that are sort of interactive features that people can use. But then also there are sort of occasional in-gallery interactive things, like we did a VR project a couple of years ago.
We're going to talk about some of that.
Yeah, so that's what I do, and I lead a team of designers, developers, or designer devs, and product people and content producers, and we work together to make all of that happen.
Great. I'm very keen to talk to you about kind of structures and working practices and so on. But let's take a little step back and really start at the beginning. So tell us a little about the Tate and the Tate's, for those who maybe not that familiar, the Tate's remit, and then how digital supports that remit.
Yeah. So Tate, for people who don't know us, we are actually 4 galleries. So we have 2 in London, Tate Britain, which was the original, and Tate Modern, which is the one most people have heard of and seen. It's quite a big iconic building on the South Bank. We also have Tate Liverpool, which is on the Albert Docks, and Tate St Ives, which is, as the name suggests, in St Ives, right on the beach. It's an absolutely beautiful place. We hold the nation's art collection on behalf of the nation. So we have a responsibility, there's sort of a public responsibility there. And our mission is to help people connect with, enjoy, and understand art, broadly speaking.
Fantastic.
And so within that, my remit within digital is how do we use digital tools to advance Tate's mission, really? How are we using the platforms and the tools available to us to help people connect with, understand, and enjoy art? And I take that remit to mean outside of the gallery walls as much as inside the gallery walls. So thinking about remote audiences who might never visit us in person because they can't, and bearing in mind, of course, that the internet is a global space. So we're speaking to international audiences as well.
Now, I noticed that digital was actually mentioned in the first line of the Tate's vision statement. I don't know when that was written, but have you seen an evolution, I guess, in the understanding, the deployment, the acceptance even of digital as a channel or a medium in the time that you've been there?
Yeah, it's really grown. And when I joined off the back of a restructure that was to create a single digital team. And so I worked very hard putting in place a sort of content strategy, putting in place working practices around agile, around audience-centered thinking. And sort of a big part of my role was sort of being an ambassador for that and for those sorts of that sort of digital thinking and audience-centered approach, particularly with the wider organization. And obviously I don't do this alone. I have a tremendous team, and that's part of everybody's remit. And I think that is the nature of the work when you're in an organization like Tate, particularly an organization of a certain age where digital is relatively new compared to everything else, compared to the hundreds of years that the business has been in business. And so there's always a requirement to sort of be an ambassador and to help people to understand. And we've made huge progress in that time. And obviously the last year, like it has for the whole world, has fast-tracked a lot of that. So the vision statement you're referring to was written in, I wanted to say last year, but it's not. It was written in 2019. And yeah, and 2020 really accelerated that.
Yeah. Right. I do want to talk about how you've adapted to COVID and the changes in the lockdown over the last year, but I'm also really interested in you mentioned the remit and the mission to engage and inform and kind of curate around art. So I'm kind of particularly interested in that process of it's not just about access but about education and allowing the audience to interpret. So when a new exhibition or when a new exhibition is designed, what does that process look like? And how engaged and involved are you? When there's a new space opening up or a new exhibition? I'm really interested in that information and experience design process.
Okay. So exhibitions are conceived many years in advance, and work begins on them from a curatorial perspective 2-3 years out.
Right.
So it's a long process, and elements of that are around research, around establishing what it is that exhibition is there to convey.
Yeah.
What the purpose of the exhibition is, what story, for want of a better word, what narrative is it telling, what new theory is it presenting, what new insight is it presenting. And then of course there's a whole process around gathering the artworks, which is I can't even pretend to know how they do it. An incredibly detailed and intricate process of reaching out to owners, estates, lenders, all of that. So that kind of happens years out. We start having conversations about exhibitions in a very light touch way about a couple of years out. There are, and this is a relatively new, in the last 2-3 years. Before that, we were coming in rather later, but each time we try and chip away at that timeline and try to get in earlier and earlier and earlier, because there's a whole piece of sort of research and quite scholarly endeavor that happens before an exhibition really even gets into kind of production phase, what we would call production. And we're trying to get in earlier and earlier and earlier on that to understand, and for the teams working on it to really immerse themselves in the themes and ideas, the ambition of the curator, what the purpose of that exhibition is. Because what we're trying to do ultimately is to help tell that story and help translate some of those themes in sometimes quite condensed ways out to a public, because either what we're trying to do is invite them in and encourage them to come and visit in person, or we're trying to give a flavor of that to people who can't visit. But 2 years out is a long time. So we start, those conversations start with quite light touch, and there are sort of what's called a commissioning meeting, but with senior curatorial team, and the head of content and I will attend. There's a lot of discussion, debate, and teasing out on those threads. Then goes quiet for a little while, everyone goes away and does their own thing and cogitates, and we all work separately. Then we reconvene, and different times vary, but we reconvene again some months later for a kickoff meeting. And then there are regular touch points, because an exhibition is a huge endeavor, and with pretty much every department across Tate is involved in some level. So you have these incredible kickoff meetings with 50 people in them. And you then have to very quickly establish work streams that run in parallel with that. So then it's just a question of trying to keep our work stream running in parallel with everybody else's work stream, proposing ideas back, working out what works, working out what doesn't, working out what's possible, and then going into production ourselves.
Yeah. And you mentioned what works and what doesn't work, and I'm really interested in what some of those considerations. Let's talk the physical space first. So those considerations of designing for a physical gallery space, of digital experiences within that. I think we've all over the years experienced the frustration of seeing a black screen, next to in a gallery or a museum that you really want to engage with. So that kind of redundancy of having hundreds of people pouring at a digital touch point. I was just wondering what other things you need to consider, around things like redundancy or people's just enjoyment of the space.
There's lots of things to consider. So in no particular order, obviously in the digital space that we're in, we are creating the content that goes on the screen sometimes, but by no means always goes on the screens in the galleries. There are other screens in the galleries. There are screens that do multiple purposes, and they're not all owned by digital. In fact, the screens aren't owned by us at all. There's a separate department for running and maintaining that kind of the hardware in the buildings. But there is an ongoing challenge in kind of making sure that we don't incur the technical debt of having kit in the buildings that falls apart. Right. So that is an ongoing challenge, and a relatively, it's an ongoing challenge for an organization where we're also trying to maintain buildings that hold millions and millions of pounds worth of art. Yeah. So that's all taken as part of a big estate piece. In terms of the considerations of what we do in the gallery, we try and take an audience-centered approach, of course. There's always ongoing research into audiences who are visiting us in person. They're surveyed regularly. There are lots of opportunities for visitors to give us feedback. We get lots of, we have to balance, really. There are two sort of competing audience needs around screens. One is to have some kind of interactive experience in the gallery that's engaging and entertaining. Yeah. The other is to not see a screen at all. There are lots of people who come to galleries to get away from screens and to not be looking at things through a lens, and to be looking at things just right there and to be present with it. Yeah. And also particularly families. Quite often we hear this a lot from family audiences. They've come to the galleries, they brought their kids to the galleries to get their kids off screens. Yeah. So we're trying to navigate that space, because they're all in the same space. Yeah. And my inclination at the moment is, wherever possible, to provide things that aren't if you don't engage with the screen, you don't have a bad experience. It's fine. You can have an entirely analog experience. And I think that's really, really important that we have spaces where we can do that. But then where we are providing a digital offer, that it's an opt-in, it's enjoyable, it works, and wherever possible, it uses the screens you brought with you.
Right. Okay. A bring your own device kind of.
UIOD. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, keeps down, as you said, on that de-risking and the the cost of ownership and so on. Very smart. So you mentioned a few audiences already, a few different kind of need states, if you like, of people who want a digital experience, those who don't, families. Do you use persona? Do you have persona that you design for?
We have tried persona. They've not quite landed. I think part of the challenge we have is we have so many different audiences, and they come for very many different purposes. We do have audience segments, and we do have priority audience groups that we're targeting.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of research into those, and we use that research very actively, but we don't develop personas in that kind of classic way that I have done in other places.
Okay, good stuff. Let's talk a little, inevitably we're going to talk a little bit about kind of lockdown. Like many sectors, footfall was just closed overnight, and you had to adapt with very little roadmap or visibility that it was happening. So how have you adapted over the last year?
So it's kind of gone in phases, mostly because I think everybody's experience of lockdown and pandemic has gone in phases. There's that first phase sort of around this time last year, which was full of adrenaline and the kind of sudden pivot and, oh my God, what are we going to do? And really, how long are we going to close for? And I remember when we first closed, we were talking about reopening in May.
Yeah.
We were just talking about reopening in May 2020, not 2021. So we did I did a very rapid rework sketch of our priorities. So previously we were sort of 50-50 promoting exhibitions and promoting the collection, which is free to come and visit. But exhibitions took the lion's share of our effort and had the lion's share of the display space, and that speaks directly to our business model. So very, very quickly, our fast pivot was around pivoting the website to recognize and acknowledge that the galleries are closed.
Okay, so just basic information.
Shut it down. And because there was a lot of noise out there, so just being very, very clear. And then very quickly afterwards, refactoring the key landing areas of the website to be promoting the collection and talking about the collection and art and what you can enjoy online, and how and immediately encouraging that sort of enjoyment of a remote visit. We did a lot around content that sort of supported and that was lifting or calming or comforting or soothing, trying to speak to that kind of national spirit of
interesting.
anxiety.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Well, we were seeing this on our social channels as well. That's what people wanted, was just a moment. People were online either devouring the news, which is an incredibly anxiety-inducing experience, or they were experimenting. Lots of new audiences who'd never experienced a culture online before were all sort of experimenting with how they tapped into it. So being as user-friendly, absolutely user-friendly, lowest bar to entry as we could, but again, being as soothing, comforting, welcoming, warm, calming as possible. We weren't bringing out the challenging artworks in those first few weeks. We also sent camera crews into the galleries while we could. We actually closed our doors on the 18th of March, which was a Wednesday. So we had a few more days before the actual national lockdown kicked in, when the galleries were closed. But we had to sort of really quickly work out what social distancing meant, how does that, because all this stuff that we know now that we didn't know then, how the virus transmits, whether it transmits through surfaces, how to keep camera crews safe. So we did a very, very quick scramble, very tiny crew in to film the Andy Warhol exhibition that just opened.
I noticed that it just opened just before lockdown. Yeah.
The Aubrey Beardsley exhibition, which has only been open for a few weeks. We also were due to be opening the following week an exhibition of performance art, which is sort of this annual performance exhibition, which is all in person. It's all in-person performance. And we went in, there was one artist who was in the country he'd come in to come and sort of set up. And we went in and filmed his piece. But actually what he did, kind of amazingly, was he changed the piece to make it filmable.
Yeah.
So that the piece then became a digital performance, a performance for digital audiences specifically.
That's
Isn't
great.
that amazing?
It is amazing, and actually it taps into a couple of questions that have come in around how close, if ever, you've mentioned like you work with the artists themselves in designing a digital aspect to the experience. Is that a common occurrence, or?
It's not very common. We work with artists closely for filming, living artists, obviously, let's be clear. Not all of them are, sadly. We work very closely with artists when we're filming them. We'll go in and film, and that's quite a classic, working with someone to make sure that you're representing them the way they want to be represented, to make them feel comfortable, to help them to open up, to
show the craft as well, give access to
show their craft. Absolutely. We do, we have strands of films that go that we try to film them when we can in their space where they are. So we work very closely with them on that. But that's not so much, I wouldn't count that as sort of crafting a digital piece. That's about making, a film. That's that's an established model. We know that. I suppose the Foston piece last year was a really good example of where an artist sort of adapts to what's happening and adapts to having to speak to a digital audience. We did some work. We occasionally do some work with the Turbine Hall artists who are coming in for the Turbine Hall Commission. So we did some work, this is 2-3 years ago, with Tanya Bruguera, when she was the Turbine Hall artist, because she had a lot of ambition to do a lot of stuff with digital, which in the end didn't make it into the commission. And this is also part of the process of an artist's process, is exploring and casting the net really wide and really going and digging into things. But then a lot of that gets abandoned as they hone down onto what it is they're actually going to make. So we did lots of exploratory work with Tanya, and workshops and bringing people in for her to speak to, but also going with her to go and speak to groups and that kind of thing. And in the end, that work she didn't pursue those avenues. But what's interesting is the conversations we had afterwards was that she had learned a lot through that process. It had started ideas for her about other work she might make in the future. Right. So
both the physical space and the digital space are kind of being considered by artists about, when they want to present their work.
Yeah, I think increasingly there are artists who are very actively interested in the digital space, in digital tools. It's a material in the same way that paint and pastels are, right? It's a material to play with, and you can see that there are artworks being made. There have been artworks being made in code for decades now, and there are artworks being made in VR. We at the moment, because a lot, aside from the commissions that come in, a lot of what Tate does is we're presenting works that are made, that the artist has already made. We're not always involved in the artwork making process, but where that happens, we're in dialogue a lot. It's really interesting.
It was really interesting, again, backtracking. Caroline Madison's asked a question I'm going to come back to, but she works at Penguin and was previously one of our breakfast session guests, and she was telling us a little bit about obviously they can see through search inquiries and purchases, like how the people's reading habits changed over the lockdown. And again, there was this move towards nostalgia and comfort, as well as people exploring the themes of a pandemic and contagion through some of the works they were reading. What has been, in your view, of the role of art, I guess, through this period in helping people either make sense of what's going on or as a distraction? How have people engaged with art differently, and have different people engaged with art over this period?
That's an interesting question. What we saw early on, obviously, we've talked about this kind of need for something that's comfortable and familiar. We've seen different types of engagement different ways. So we have seen lots of people making. Yeah. So lots of people returning to art and being involved in making themselves and sharing that. And we've done some great campaigns with Tate Collective, which is our young people's program. Yeah. and young people's membership program as well has done call outs and has created billboards made in response to Tate's collection made by young adults, which have been up. There were up around London. There's another load up around Liverpool going.
You have a series called Create Like an Artist, I noticed, sort of like, you know, Paint Like Turner, which I think is setting the standards quite high, you know, but
we've also got Paint Like Picasso. Those films that we've had for a while, and what they do is that's another route in, right? Because for lots of audiences that coming to art and trying to understand cubism sort of as an intellectual endeavor is a bit, you know, it's a bit unfamiliar, and the thing doesn't, what we hear quite a lot is that painting doesn't look like the thing that he's trying to paint. That doesn't look like a woman. So, but in a way, you can explain that in lots of different ways. You can explain it intellectually and in that sort of art historical way, or you can go in through sideways through how it was made, how Picasso or Turner paint is actually as much about how they look and what they're looking at and what they're thinking about, and then how they apply paint to canvas, as it is about, you know, can you develop the skills to be a grandmaster? Same, you know, we've got Make a Pot Like Grayson Perry, we've got How to Cast Like Rachel White-Reed, we've got Warhol screen printing, lots of, and some of that's about understanding what the artist intended. It's also about just really appreciating the skill and the craft involved, because you can also look at a work of art, and even if you don't necessarily like the aesthetics of what you're looking at, you can appreciate the skill and you can admire how it was made.
Or in some cases underappreciate like how it's made until you really examine the process of it. So people have been engaging through art through creation, and any other ways you think?
Well, I think we've seen lots of different ways. We've seen lots of waves of audience engagement online in terms of people wanting lots of live stuff early on, and this I think was across the cultural sector, people wanting talks, people wanting live streams, and then that very quickly dropping away as the homeschooling and the home working kicked in. Mm-hmm. And what we're seeing is that people's lives are so much now through screens like this that that's not what they want to do in their leisure time, and the sort of more appetite for on demand rather than live kind of thing. We also saw lots of kids activity. Yeah. So Tate Kids has had a blockbuster of a year, and we have that sort of parents coming online, teachers also coming online looking for resources for kids, for things for children to do that are around creativity but also learning, and that they know will have a certain quality level to them, but also just kids coming and making stuff. So we have a Take Kids gallery. There's a game you can make an artwork and post it up to the gallery, and that's, I mean, we had 600% increase in traffic to that gallery, to that function in the last year. But also what's interesting to me is that you could almost track, certainly in 2020, as countries locked down, you could track the countries locking down by the nationality of the children who are making pictures.
That's so interesting. So
there was a point where suddenly it was Italians. All these Italian kids were on the website, and then the Americans come in. So you know, you can sort of track the thing. And also what's interesting to me is what they're making the works about.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of NHS rainbows, but then lots, you know, then they get pictures of COVID. You get pictures, you know, the microbe picture, the picture of the virus that you see on screens every time Chris Whitty gets up and talks. So, you know, what they're putting in as well was kind of interesting to me.
Really interesting. And have you, I mean, I'm sure you'll be in planning mode now for moving hopefully back into the physical spaces. And what have you learned over the last year in terms of, you know, well, I guess there are two parts to this. One is like, you know, how do you think you know, how's that transition looking in terms of maybe, you know, maybe having a hybrid experience almost, and what aspects, what thing of digital that you've tried this year do you think will persist, you know, over the longer term?
So yes, we're prepping. One of the things that we're prepping for the third time is how different the gallery visits experience is now. People have to book tickets now to come and visit our collection, whereas previously you could just walk straight in, and that's a track and trace thing. But it's interesting because we're learning more now about who's visiting the collection, which is information that we didn't have before. what we have learned in terms of what we do. So what we do with that data, we don't yet know, but we're looking at it. That's good. That's going to give us some interesting ideas. Absolutely, we're going to be having a hybrid experience. I think the public have demonstrated a huge appetite for wanting to engage with all sorts of different, just basically wanting to engage online.
Yeah.
The nation has moved online and developed digital skills that they didn't have before, many of them.
Yeah,
we have audiences that we couldn't reach online before that now we can. We are thinking carefully about our audiences. We have some audiences, particularly, for example, our core Tate Britain audience, who are older, who were much slower to come back last time we reopened because many of them were shielding. We're thinking very carefully about what we can offer people as a sort of pre-visit, during visit, and after visit experience. We're also thinking very carefully about our remote audience, because Tate online, Tate Digital was the only bit of Tate, public-facing Tate, that was open for a lot of last year. And we have developed internally a much, we always had that sense within the digital department, but I think across the organization now, there's a much stronger sense of a remote audience who may not visit our gallery buildings, or may only visit our buildings once, because that's when they're in the country, right? They don't live in the UK, or they just happen to live a very long way away. And the sense of possibility and scale of that remote audience, but also that it's different, that we can't assume any previous knowledge. We don't know them as well as we know our regular audiences, so we need to get to know them better. And we need to think about what they need. Yeah. I think the other thing that we are thinking very carefully about is our, what we call a public program offer, which are things like talks and events. There have been some happening online, but I think there's more work we can do in that area. I'm really interested in what the changes to what this last year of really disrupted education does for people, particularly university age people, what that does for their interest in thinking about other ways of learning. Tate's what's called an IRO, which has IRO status, which essentially gives us the same sort of status as a university in terms of research. We have a big research department who are, and so there are enormous pockets of knowledge and learning within Tate that we could be thinking about how do we sort of transform that? Yeah,
surface that thinking and research and engage people.
And what is the model for that, and what do we need? And the overarching question for all of us is about what new business models do we need as an organization, because the last 12 months has been incredibly difficult for the business model, for the gallery's business model, which relies on audiences coming to the gallery and buying tickets for exhibitions, or visiting our cafes and visiting our shops. So thinking about what does digital afford us in terms of additional sources of revenue, for example. That's a big question, because we are we're in a difficult place financially.
Well, hopefully that will ease as people kind of come back in. But as you say, maximizing those opportunities for scale and reach and new experiences that digital affords. I'm going to nip into a couple of questions, and actually they're related to that. Caroline was saying there's a lot of online virtual tours for galleries early on, and I think you touched on this. Is this something you think will continue to aid access for audiences?
I'm not so sold on the online tours. And by that I mean the tours which try to replicate, and I've seen them more because they've been pitched to me more in that sort of VR tour where you can go into a building and literally move around it. We have experimented with online exhibition tours. We made some films for our members. So one of the other strands we've been experimenting is what can we offer our members when the galleries are closed? What does membership for Tate feel like when the buildings are closed? And one of the things we offered them were exhibition tours, and we're doing a piece of evaluation, audience evaluation on that at the moment. I am much more interested in because you can't replicate digitally the feeling of being in the building. Like you're not in this big, enormous power station or this kind of incredible sort of, I don't know, cathedral-like vibe. you're in your home or you're at the bus stop or wherever you are. So rather than trying, so that, and that is a lot of why this falls flat. And you also can't replicate the sense of being physically in front of the artwork. But there are other things that a gallery can do. So I'm interested in what is native to the digital experience. What does digital do that real life can't?
Yeah.
And I think, and that also helps us to sort of break out of thinking, well, we've just got to copy and paste real life. We've got to, we have to do it this way. That actually creates a bigger arena for more creativity and more creative thinking. And I can't pretend to have the answers yet, but I'm very, very curious about what are the very many different ways, and I think there are very many different ways we can answer the question about what is uniquely digital about this artwork.
But I think, as you say, if you're going to recreate a space digitally, why recreate it like slavishly? And so it feels like you're walking around exactly the same space when you could recreate the artist's atelier, like I think you did was it the Modigliani one where you're in their studio? So rather than coming to the Tate, you could be transported.
Exactly, and that was one of the criteria of that project, was to do something that we couldn't do any other way. And the Modigliani studio, the building still exists, but it's now a private apartment, so you can't visit it. The public can't go and visit. We can't go back in time. But can we use VR to recreate that instead? So what can you do digitally that you can't do any other way? You can go and visit a gallery if you really, really make an effort and get out there. You can go and visit the building. So what can digital do that we couldn't otherwise do?
Another, when we're talking about new channels and new experiences and ways to experience art, we had a couple of questions, I think Caroline and a couple of others asking around, and I'm really interested in how you decide which channels to try. New channels are emerging all the time, TikTok, Instagram, virtual reality. What's that process like of scanning the horizon and deciding what to work in? And Caroline in particular, just as she's really enjoyed the Instagram TV, lives on the Tate channel over the last year. So how do you decide what to do and what to keep?
Yeah, I have to be honest, some of it's resource based.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're a small team, and the social media team is 2.5 people.
Yeah.
So we can't be on every platform.
Mm-hmm.
So the next decision-making point is, where are the audience? Who are the audience we're trying to reach?
Yeah.
Where are they? We can try a platform. I'm really up for experiments and trialing things, but then also for stopping them if they don't work. And because what we do on social media, and the social media team do an amazing job of making everything specific to that platform. Our audiences on different platforms are different, right? It's not just make once and then plonk it in lots of different places. It's a different thing each time. So there's quite careful thought about where audiences are, what they're already engaging with, and how can we join that platform as a participant rather than just being a big brand plonking ourselves in space. Yeah. And then, if we try something and experiment with it and give it a phase of the trial, see what sort of traction we get.
Mm-hmm. Great. Dave raised a question here that I think you'll have quite a unique viewpoint on, given that you've worked in Channel 4, BBC and so on, and then come over to the museum space. So who do you see as your competitors? Other galleries or other forms of entertainment? And also I'm interested in what was your experience like in transition? What did you bring with you?
Okay, so I'll do the competitors first. Everyone. And I say that as a moderately competitive person. No, okay. So I am very live to the fact that our audiences are human beings with digital lives, right? It's very, very tempting to think of your audience as just somebody who engages with your thing and that's it. Our audiences, when they're in the gallery, they're in the gallery. We know where they are. They're in the physical space. We've got them. That's great. But digitally, we don't got them. We are just a tab in their browser, or we're on their phone. We're in their feed in amongst everything else they've got. So we have to think about ourselves and think about the user experience of how people are experiencing, are accessing us and experience our content within the context of everything else they're doing. And so one of the conversations I've been having at Tate, particularly around lives, because there's a lot of ambition wanting to broadcast stuff, really, is the question of, well, if you think about it, our audiences are watching a lot of stuff, right? So anything that we make that's a live broadcast has to go toe to toe, has to be ready to go toe to toe with Bridgerton.
Yeah, and when you say ready to go toe to toe, what are you saying in terms of findability, quality?
In terms of findability, quality, but also it's just got to be engaging enough.
Okay.
Because they've got to, people are choosing. There's a choice online. You don't have to watch that IGTV stream. You couldn't just scroll straight on past that Instagram post. You don't have to engage with it at all. You don't have to press play on that YouTube video. You could go and do something else, and you will have alerts popping up. You will have WhatsApp chat with your friends. You've got real life people engaging with you online as well as us. So we have got to be engaging enough and relevant enough for people to want to join us. And that's what I mean when I see, everybody's our competitor, but not really a competitor. We're not, it's not either or, it's sort of how do we exist in this space? Because if we're trying to compete with everybody else, you're on a hiding to nothing, you're going to lose. Because there isn't really a winner in that. Well, there is a winner. It's Netflix, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, right? So it's more how do we exist in this huge ecosystem of content and experience that our real live audience people are swimming in.
Yeah. So either complement or contrast that, I guess, as you were saying,
Exactly.
physical space offering people places to come to get away from screens in some
Exactly. And also sometimes it's about how are we a participant in that. So if acknowledging the real life that's happening, how are we responding to things that are happening, sort of news and current affairs? How are we responding to enormous concerns around climate change? How are we engaging different people and the sort of the real wider societal concerns that they have in their lives, as well as telling stories of art and artists.
We have a few more questions. I'm going to come to those in a minute, but I wanted to just kind of close off our chat a little bit by asking about the practicalities of getting stuff done at the Tate. So could you tell us a little bit more about the shape of the team and methodologies that you use to get things designed and built and out there into the world?
So we have you can pretty much divide the department in two. We have a product team, which is a small team of developers. We have a designer. We have a product manager. We have a project manager. We have a tester. And we have a content team we have a head of content, a senior producer. We also have an executive producer who works on our things that straddle gallery and web. And then a team of content producers. So how we get things live, it depends. A lot of what we make is content, and that's the content team are working very closely with teams in marketing and what we call interpretation, which is, until I worked in museums, I did not know what that was. That's the team who write the copy that goes alongside the artwork. So the place you see the most of the text on the walls, those big texts when you walk into the galleries, it's interpretation, and their craft is to communicate the meaning and the story in the gallery, but also we're working with them online. We're also working with the research team. So anyway, that's the sort of, they're quite a gallery facing team. The product team are working on the website product by and large, and they follow sort of an agile-ish methodologies. So we have 3 weekly sprints, product stand-ups. We follow the classic cycles of dev, test, iterate. There's a lot of user testing that we do when we can.
Okay.
And that's how we work.
Yeah, great. And over the last year, how have the team adapted, and what have you changed your practices? What's worked for you to keep you sort of healthy and happy and productive, creative and productive over this last year? I'm assuming you have. I'm hoping you have.
Yeah, we're all really miserable and unproductive. It's been an experiment in the kind of balance of enough communication and together time, whilst not requiring people to be staring into a screen all the time, like giving people enough time off screen, and also trying not to eat into people's days, because this world of working remotely through Zoom really packs your days out, right? A conversation where you could have just turned to the person next to you suddenly becomes a 30-minute meeting. So we've been quite careful in crafting. So we've been testing and adapting. We have done things like, things that we've done that I love and that have really changed how the vibe of the team have been. I have stopped chairing our department meetings. This is my favorite. I stopped chairing our department meetings. We have a rotating chair, so everybody has a go.
Okay.
Which means that the department meetings are, you get a different person's perspective every time. And we've had meetings that have included mindfulness meditation. We've had meetings that have included drawing. We've had meetings that have included going out for a walk, all sorts of things. So it's brought a lot of creativity into what was otherwise just fortnightly everybody sitting listening to me telling them what's what.
Seems appropriate.
Yeah. We have a weekly equity and belonging meeting, which covers topics of inclusion, which is just sort of everybody come in and we discuss in small groups and we reconvene, and that's becoming a place where we continue to tweak and adapt how we work and how we improve a sense of equity and belonging within the team, what we can do to affect change there. We have these daily stand-ups, which we didn't have when we were in person. The product team had stand-ups. We didn't as a department. We had a weekly one. We now have daily stand-ups so we've kind of got the sense of everybody doing things. And we use Slack. We have a lot of chat.
A lot of chat in Slack. Great.
I think reasonably healthy, and lots of flexibility if people need time. People need to take time.
Good. I'm going to go to a couple of questions, and then one last question I want to come back to ask you. I'm glad that you're being asked this, because I definitely haven't found my position on it. But these rise in NFTs, or non-fungible tokens, blockchain, which I don't know how familiar you are with them, but it's definitely kind of a hot topic in art at the moment. Do you have any views on that, and do you see it kind of being something that maybe it will end up having a role in galleries, or in terms of authenticity or ownership?
I don't know, is the honest answer. I really don't know. I think there was there was stuff, what was it, last weekend before last, there was a whole storm with the Global Art Museum selling non-fungible tokens in Rijksmuseum artworks, things like that, which I think has been quite clearly outed as a stunt. Unfortunate, and it's raised the profile, and it's certainly raised it as a topic of conversation. It has slightly had the I think the opposite effect than it was intended, which is to make a lot of people quite suspicious of them, and this kind of what is this doesn't feel like a safe space to be operating in. I think the jury is just still very much out on those from a gallery perspective. From
a gallery perspective as well. I think also in the art, both art creators seem to be on both sides of it. Consumers of art seem to be on both sides of this quite divisive topic. I'm not going to confess to being gens up on it if I'm being honest. So I'm going to let that one just slide a little bit rather than embarrass myself.
We'll come back to it in a year or so.
Or end up getting doxed by a load of angry Bitcoin investors after this chat. A couple of questions about revenue, and again about ways of uncovering new sources of revenue. You touched on the importance of it. Any thoughts on where that might go? Any things that you've done? Jane Moat was asking here, have you found any ways to drive revenue through digital, or any kind of promising avenues to explore if it's early days?
So at the moment, our focus has been on our online shop, which was already established. I think where we've had success, and I think looking out across the sector, that it has been where things were already reasonably established. That's where has been successful. Yeah. So our online shop, great.
Yeah, I was nearly late for this web chat because I was buying a Barbara Hepworth poster from the Tate shop. I'm terrible for it. I was doing a little bit last minute research, and I was like, I just have a look in the shop.
Really good shop. Yeah. Really recommend. So so yeah, we've done that, and I think membership is an area that we're very keen to explore. We're continuing to explore, so I can't claim to have any answers there.
Yeah.
That's more about how do we make sure that there's a membership offer that is as rich online as it is.
Yeah, so different types of membership then. Yeah.
I don't think we're in the space of different types of membership. It's more about how do we deliver the membership, a Tate membership. How do we make sure that there's enough online to make it feel special, as well as just getting you free into the exhibitions. What else do you get? How do we sort of foster and really build a sense of a relationship between our members and Tate, and the sense of being part of something bigger? And then I think there is something in, I think learning is an area that is ripe for exploration by a lot of people, as we've seen with people turning to different courses and learning new things online and in lockdown. But also I think as a more long-term thing I am watching is how is particularly higher and further education going to change in response to the pandemic, and what
as you touched on,
and the impact there. So I think there's lots to explore there. And I know, I was talking to my friend and sort of opposite number at the V&A, Carty Price, and she was saying, they've had enormous success with their online course, moving courses that they already had and moving them into an online space. They've seen enormous, and that's sort of courses more about art history and making. So I think there's a lot to explore and play with there for the whole sector.
Fantastic, and it opens up that remit as well of educating and involving people in art to a wider. So it's a win-win, really, I guess.
And I think it's a national, and it's a natural extension of our sort of public service status as well.
Brett Spencer had a question around whether the digital team have revenue targets. I'd broaden that out actually to say, how do you measure success as a digital team? What are your metrics?
All the usual metrics around traffic and engagement. So visits, visitors, bounce rate, things like that. The usual sort of quantifiable objectives. We also we run an annual survey. It's more quantifiable. Qualitative is the word I'm looking for. And we do a fair amount of sort of ad hoc when we do our user testing, sort of sentiment analysis. There's lots of analysis of our audiences in social media, and people, frankly, are quite happy to tell us when they don't like it. In terms of financial targets, we don't have at the moment. I think this will change. At the moment, we don't have a financial target with a pound sign against it. Those financial targets sit within our sort of the sales teams for tickets and membership, and then the online shop. What we do have are targets for converting people to those platforms. So sending people on to how many people have moved off into that funnel.
Sensitively considering the right points to move someone.
Exactly. Did we set them in there, set them off on their journey?
Yeah, great, fantastic. Dave Wood, getting in there with a tricky question at the end. What doesn't work online? What have you learned that doesn't work online? You can thank Dave for that one.
Thank you, Dave. I'm trying to think, because they're countless. I mean, there are all sorts of things where you kind of go, oh, that didn't really work. Well, I think over the last 12 months, what we have learned is what doesn't work online are things that are live, appointment to view, live streams, particularly on a Friday night. Nobody wants to do that. But anything that's really specific appointment to view, unless you have a really, really unique offer.
Right.
But by and large, appointment to view live is not as successful as on demand for the space we're in. Yeah,
I think I've seen that across a few other people have learned that over the
and I think it was that thing where because visiting a gallery is obviously a live experience. There's an assumption that, well, that's what people will want digitally as well.
When you go, typically,
exactly, and it's that thing of don't presume that people want to watch your live stream instead of Friday night telly.
My very last question is just a quick one before we wrap up. Is what are you excited about? What coming out either culturally or technologically? What's coming up on the radar that's getting you excited?
Oh my God. Do you know, I haven't thought about that for ages, because mostly what I'm excited about is seeing the rest of my family and getting out of this house.
What
am I excited about? I think that technologies like AR and mixed reality.
Yeah.
We've seen some experiments. We saw obviously the RSC's The Dream.
I watched the other night on your recommendation. It's fantastic. Was
an incredible and very, very high-end and complex version of it. But something playing around with those technologies about what can they deliver in terms of a shared experience remotely, or what can they facilitate in terms of inside the gallery that allows people to have different experiences without interrupting each other. So by which point, can you be on a particular kind of a tour that's working for you, but isn't interrupting people who want a more kind of classic
absolutely
gallery
an additional layer of something as well.
Yeah.
I think that idea of shared immersion as well has been so tricky for virtual reality in particular to crack, because it's quite an isolating experience as soon as you get that headset on. But certainly with AR, it feels like maybe you've got a better opportunity for more shared and accessible experiences.
And I think that question of how can you convey a shared experience digitally through all sorts of, include just web technologies. How do you give people a sense that they are amongst lots of people who are doing something at the same time? We know, and we're feeling, aren't we, how vital that sense of community and that sense of shared experience and doing things together is. It's what people are hungry for. It's the first thing everybody does as soon as lockdown eases even a little bit. So what can... And it's something that lots of our sort of screen-based digital stuff doesn't do as well as we thought it did. Yeah. So I don't know what the solutions are. I'm quite sure many will emerge, and then just like a couple will last. Yeah. I'm curious to see what they are.
Right. Yeah, but likewise, I'd say it's a space which has been and continues to be rich for innovation. So I'm very excited to see what comes in the next few years. Thank you so much, Hilary. It's been a pleasure to chat to you. Really appreciated it. We will write a little summary of this up and share it. We will share the video as well. We haven't quite finalized our speaker for next month, but it's looking to be another good one. So for everybody, if you're still here and still watching, keep an eye out on your emails. And yeah, a couple of people on chat saying thank you, and we'll pass those on to you as well, Hilary. So, and I'd like to say thank you to everybody else for joining us. As we say, lots of competition out there, so, so thanks very much for allowing us to take up an hour of your time. Thanks, Hilary. Thanks, everybody.
No problem at all. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Cheerio. Bye-bye.